Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey guys, welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We always are celebrating creativity, and my goal is to talk to interesting people and find out what makes them tick. I'm Sean Murphy. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University. I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit. I'm a writer. You can find out more about what I do at seanmurphy.net. But as I like to say, the joy of my job and the different hats I wear is it allows me to have conversations with cool people. So this podcast grew out of that. And my mission in life now is to track down people way above my intelligence and coolness and wrangle them for a little bit and get them to talk. I'm super excited to shout out to my good friend, Mark Safarian, for connecting us. Today, I'm joined by Ryan Flahive. Like with so many people I talk to, the official bio is truly like pages long. So here's a condensed version. We're going to provide links so you can go check out all the different projects he's about to talk about and really get a flavor of what he works on. But here's the Cliff's Notes. Ryan is an entrepreneur, podcaster, learning tech and publishing executive with deep experience in higher education, workforce development, and social impact. He's also a producer and host of Climate Changers, a podcast that features interviews with remarkable entrepreneurs, scientists, activists, educators, and other leaders who are taking initiative as we face a glowing climate crisis. Hello, 2025. Based out of the beautiful Boulder, Colorado, and I'm rocking my Colorado Caribous old school soccer shirt. It's an honor to have a chance to chat. Ryan, welcome. So good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Classic shirt.
Yeah, man. I mean, we got to keep it real, right? And I always
Sure.
try to do like a little bit of a shout out to my guest if I'm able. So let's celebrate the beautiful state, my second hometown of Boulder. So as I said, I scarcely conveyed the scope right from the horse's mouth. Tell us about what you're working on. What are some of your current favorite projects? I know you are doing a lot of different things, and what's driving you both to 2025 and what you're really focused on right now?
Sure. Well, I have a couple different hats that I wear. So for my day job, I'm an acquisitions editor in personal and professional development at Wiley Publishers. And, that carries the thread that I think you'll see throughout my projects of wanting to have an impact on people's lives. And so I'm very, very honored to have started that job a couple weeks ago, just getting going. So if you have any people who should be published, who I should sign up, send them my way. For the last decade or so, I've been a climate warrior. I have two daughters, and even before that, when I was in publishing in a prior life, and I managed a lot of geoscience books, I really became aware of how critical it is to focus on climate change and how it's really the biggest existential threat that we face, and that's only become clearer, in recent years. And so, with that as context, when I first left my first gig in publishing, I started this podcast, Climate Changers. It started as a book idea, and I wanted to interview the people who are going to be the innovators around climate. And I wasn't even really a podcast listener at the time, but my buddy Peter is like, you should really just do a podcast, at least as you're developing the book, because that way you can get content out constantly. And then the podcast became its own thing. And, I started with people I knew, but I've had people like Jane Goodall and a lot of other, real pretty famous climate warriors and people who focus on biodiversity as well on the podcast. And that's been a real honor for me to have the opportunity to have these conversations with people who are really, dedicating their lives to saving the future for our kids.
Yeah, I mean, and as you said, and as I alluded, it would be a joke if it was remotely funny, but against anything, even the most cynical of us would have predicted, the climate crisis and our kind of American reaction to it has only gotten worse and stands to become worse still. So I think it's fair and safe to say that the work you're doing, sadly, has never been more vital, more timely. And that really, I mean, I definitely want to make sure that we're getting a measure of the man. And I've got a million questions, but I think that's a good segue into talking about what this podcast focuses on as it relates to story, and how I'm never being coy when I say to people, story is everything. Of course, it's different things in different situations, but the notion of a powerful narrative is what drives everything from a court case to a good marketing campaign to activism. And I wonder what your take is right out of the gate, um, in terms of what could be an easier and more powerful message than we're killing the planet and our kids are in peril, and somehow that still doesn't work. So maybe just at a fundamental level, and then we can ski down the mountain. What is it with the story that is at once right, so clear and yet so difficult?
Sure. Well, one of the thought leaders who's influenced me the most is Seth Godin, and I had the honor of being a co-author on a book with him called The Carbon Almanac, and he was also a guest on my podcast a while back.
Yeah.
And the title of that podcast is "Climate Change is a Marketing Problem." And his point was that the verbiage used around climate just wasn't helpful to the narrative and to influencing people to make the right decisions. He suggested that we should call it instead atmospheric cancer, or something along those lines, than just climate change. Because climate change sounds slow. It can mean a lot of different things to different people.
Yeah.
And the climate's always changed, right? So, so where does that fit in? One of the things that I learned working on this book with Seth too, that I think is really important is, a lot of people think about their carbon footprint. And so what they can do in their individual lives. An interesting thing about the carbon footprint is it was invented by British Petroleum as a way to move the pressure off of the big industries and onto you as an individual to make you feel guilty about climate. So it's kind of genius. And I really didn't know that, but it's all very well documented.
Wow. I didn't know that. And that gets to, well, and again, so right, as writers and storytellers, we just are allergic to cliche, but when you're confronted with cliche, you just have to dive in unabashedly. Usually when you say follow the money, that's true, but I think we could tick off any number of crises that are facing us right now, existential issues. But as it relates to climate change, the climate catastrophe, I think that's an open and shut case of, it's not only been so much money dumped because of very cynical and invested players, but their ability to have counter narratives and say, well, we don't know, and just introducing a little bit of wiggle room. I've seen peers that otherwise would be, I would consider, very intelligent, very politically hip, that are like, it sounds like it's really complicated. And I think that complication of it has been the successful pushback over an issue that at once is, of course, very complex, but is also, again, very fundamentally easy, in the sense of like some of the extremely easy measures as a civilization we could take that we're just not willing to take. And it's like the only reason is, yeah, because the people that are the worst perpetrators are making billions of dollars. Or am I oversimplifying something that's already pretty,
No, I
straightforward?
think I think you're spot on, and I don't want to diminish the impact that an individual can have by getting an EV or solar panels, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, for us to find viable solutions, they have to be systemic solutions. And again, this idea of the carbon footprint. So I have two, cars that run off of gas. I do, and I'm a climate guy. I would, if I could go back in time, I probably would have bought EVs then, but they're just older trucks, and I'm not in a position to buy new vehicles right now.
Yeah.
But and that's important in a lot of ways. It's important to feel like you're having an impact, and it does have an impact cumulatively. But at the end of the day, it's the men and women in boardrooms and the men and women in DC need to make the change, need to make those decisions. And people think about like the Cold War, when we were we still have nuclear weapons facing each other, but it was like really scary. And there are people protesting, and that's important because that moves the needle. But at the end of the day, it took, people from Moscow and DC in suits in a room to make the decision that made the world a safer place. And so
Yeah.
while we can have impact, a lot of that impact, and this is unfortunate for the climate in this era we're in now,
Yeah.
we need those people to be making the right decisions. And I think we were on a pretty good path with the IRA. But drill baby drill is a whole nother story, and I think we're just about to begin to see the impact of it. Now, one of the things that is good that's happened is that even though a lot of the ESG stuff is going to be pushed aside under this new administration, a lot of companies and a lot of municipalities and other organizations outside of the federal government have already made this decision that they're going to move in the right direction. So there still is, a fight to be fought. But at the end of the day, we really need to take back DC and, to really make the systemic changes that are necessary.
Yeah, and I feel like having watched this, from the trenches and certainly going back to my early days of kind of awareness and activism as a college student, I feel like we've gone through kind of peaks and valleys in terms of messaging. And one of the things I'm kind of becoming obsessed with, and I think it's an issue as it relates to this struggle, but I also think for any kind of progressive politics, I'm seeing, certainly with the benefit of hindsight, I'm becoming increasingly convinced that these appeals to people's better natures, which traditionally have worked, whether you're looking at the Bible or even, just folklore, but what the reactionary politics have done, I think, especially well, even as specious as the arguments are, they get right down to people's wallets. And they've been able to perversely position this as drill baby drill. It's putting more money in your pockets, making America stronger. And I feel like one of the things that the progressive movement as a whole can and should do much better is tie some of these things to, I hate you have to do the cliche pocketbook issues, like the climate issues mean higher air conditioning bills, higher heating bills, your kids, futures, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that this hasn't been tried, but I wonder if even some of the progressives have overthought, like, how do we make a really compelling, the kid holding the daisy? Let's get right down to brass tacks and make people think it's actually selfish in a good way to preserve the climate. Again, am I oversimplifying, or do you think there's some truth to that?
Oh, there's certainly some truth to it. In fact, one of the interesting experiments that I ran on the podcast just before the election is the last few episodes before the election, I interviewed youth climate leaders. Some of them in college, but some of them in high school. Super
Wow.
impressive people,
Yeah.
intellectuals, very dedicated. And a couple of things came out of it. One is they're very tired of everyone saying, well, at least you guys will finally solve this problem. And they're really tired of hearing, they're like, thanks for nothing. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
and then especially when you get to the high school kids, they can't vote, and so they feel very disempowered.
Yeah.
And this led a creative partner of mine, this guy Rand, who's a genius, a marketing genius. We're brainstorming around building a platform for youth to express their feelings about climate. And one of the ideas is to have like a video, where you have a young lady saying to her parents, so you guys are voting for the price of bread versus climate. So I'm telling you right now, you're not going to have grandkids. I'm just not going to have grandkids. I'm not going to have kids, and trying to find messages like that like, okay, wait a second, is the a dollar more for bread, is that worth not having? My daughter won't have kids. So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of opportunities there. And I really do feel for these kids because, as you know, we're spiraling. It's just going to get worse and worse. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody would have guessed 6 months ago that LA was going to be on fire, right? I mean, these things, and now it's obviously it's settled in and we're used to it. But
Yeah.
we had, just down the street here from me, we had a fire that took out 1,000 structures in December. It's like unheard of it. And it was like an urban fire.
Right.
So we didn't know that day that that was going to happen.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that you're 100% right, that there is, a lot of the storytelling needs to change to really help people feel where it's going to hurt them. And to your other point, how there's a lot of benefit. People who get the EVs, they're not going back, not necessarily because of the pollution issues, but because they like driving the EV so much better.
Right. Right. So Ryan, through your activism, and let's focus more on maybe like our cohorts and even the older generation. What are some tactics or campaigns you found that have been successful versus what hasn't worked? So we can break it down for people checking this out. Like we can cut through the bullshit. Like what are some tired talking points that we need to hang up? And I'm saying this for myself as well, for my own arsenal of. But what are some things you've seen that have worked in swaying, people that maybe are less willing? I think younger people, you have a better chance at least getting them to listen. But the older people that are set in their ways, I know that's a tough nut to crack.
Well, an interesting example is um, the move towards heat pumps and away from natural gas heating your home.
Mhm.
There's health issues involved with natural gas and cooking with natural gas and all of those things. But in
Yeah.
terms of like the built environment, heating the home and cooling the home is one of the biggest users of energy. And when you move to a heat pump, it keeps your house at a consistent temperature throughout the year using very little electricity. It's very, very efficient. The challenge with the heat pump though is when do you replace your heating system? It's when it breaks, when it's like 5 below 0 outside, and you just call the guys, and then you put in a regular natural gas boiler, and
Yeah.
then you're back for 20 years. You're locked in. Your built environment is locked into natural gas. And so there's a group here in the Front Range, Colorado, um, called Elephant Energy, and they've done some really good, marketing and messaging around it, but also like working with real estate brokers to make sure that like when somebody moves into a house, they have all the information they need to know
Mhm.
that when this furnace goes out unexpectedly, you're going to save a lot of money if
Yeah.
you go with this instead. And so I think they've done a really innovative job there, and that gets
Yeah.
back at what we can do as individuals.
Right.
I do think though, like the epiphany around the carbon footprint for me is a big one, where they turned it on us. They make us feel guilty. We didn't build this system. We live in it. You and I are lucky in that we're educated, and we have a little more control over our situation than a lot of other people do. But
Right.
we're still in the system, and the system needs to change, and we can't do it as individuals. And so I think, as important as it is for us to make our daily decisions, the real impact is going to be, when we really take back power.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny you say power because I was going to say one of the things that I've also kind of struggled with watching it unfold in real time is trying to impress on people when I talk about this stuff. Not to say that I know what I'm talking about, but one of the things I've become convinced of, having been an observer and participant in politics, is that none of these are isolated situations, and none of them have just kind of spiraled in recent. This has been a systematic campaign. What we're seeing happen right now, right, with Elon Musk and his cohort of idiots, is the fundamental proposition that government, by virtue of being government, is bad. That was a very successful, succinct propaganda line that has continued to bear fruit for reactionary causes. So there's this instinctive distrust of progressives, some of which might be warranted. South Park, right? Like we can lampoon the well-intended, people with their head in the clouds, whatever. We can all agree to disagree and debate, but what really both motivates me and at times depresses me is we're losing battles that have been being fought way before enough progressives or enough awake and alive human beings with skin in the game even realized the fight was on. So that we're already way behind in terms of. And so where I'm going with that, I think, Ryan, is I think we also kind of need to look at any of these situations that we're currently kind of confronting as a civilization and realize that there's almost like this counter programming where if you live in a certain state, you're supposed to feel a certain way. And it's like, how do we uncouple, by keeping politics part of the equation, but convincing people it's stupid to have ready-made opinions based on what religion you are or where you live. Like, where's the patriotism in coming together for the good of our country? To me, some of these things, again, they seem so simple, but of course, they're so difficult.
No, I think you're right. At the end of the day, what we need is a transformation of our culture, an evolution of our culture. But to your point, groups like the Heritage Foundation have been planting the seeds for all of this, for almost 100 years. I think back to the 40s at least.
Right.
And so they have a lot of power and they have a lot of money, and they're representing the powers that be, a lot of it being the fossil fuel industries and related industries. um, and it's easy to see this dystopian future that we're heading into in some ways. But I worked on a really interesting project with Margaret Atwood, the author, and she writes these dystopian futures that
Yeah.
are premised on the idea of existing technology. She doesn't invent like new technologies. It's just like, this is the culture that we have, the technologies we have, and where they could go. And it's a really horrible ending. But the project that I worked on with her was called Practical Utopias. And so I was invited to work with a number of people under her guidance to think about what the future could look like in a utopia, like, kind of a study of classic utopias, from the literature, but then looking at our culture and looking at, education, politics, gender, all of this. And then I was there for climate, and what could a future look like if we actually used our technology to make the earth cleaner and safer and healthier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now you are truly in my personal sweet spot, because when I was a master's student in literature, I did my thesis on utopian literature, and the political kind of imperative of using the utopian construct to both comment on the paths that we're on and the choices we can make and the futures that can either be much more positive or radically worse. Again, what's been disheartening to me as a bright-eyed, grad student in a different century, we were talking about classic texts that at the time were only 40 years old, and it's been 40 years almost since then. And some of this stuff is beyond satire at this point. I think that's another, issue. It's been amusing and again, kind of sad for me over the years, having read Orwell and Kafka. People use those words interchangeably and they haven't even read the works. So we really do have our work cut out for us, in the sense that the playing field of getting people up to speed to understand the stakes, or how these issues have been wrestled with, they've been predicted, especially as it relates to technology, for a long time. I mean, that's science fiction, right? All the great science fiction writers were coming from a place of, this is where we're headed if we don't rein in or use compassion, or we don't make profit motive the number one motive. Some of this technology can be out of control.
Yeah, you referenced Orwell, and obviously 1984 is top of mind these days. Um, but on the flip side, and this is the challenge, I think, for you and me and your listeners and those of us who want to make the world a better place, is like, so my daughter just turned, she's a leap day baby, just turned 13 over the weekend. She didn't really have her birthday because it's not a leap year, but we need to figure out how we can frame a future that's optimistic for them. We really don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And we have to do that accepting that the climate's changing. And so part of that is climate resilience, is accepting that we are going to have more fires, we are going to have more flooding.
Yeah.
So using technology to be more resilient.
Yeah.
But part of it is looking at things like the quantum technology that's coming out, and the quantum computers are very good at, they do some things very, very well. Other things they can't touch, but they
Right.
model nature very, very well, because nature is quanta. And so my optimism is that quantum computers can help us in a lot of ways with biodiversity and climate change, in helping us discover new technologies and new materials that can absorb carbon. Um, and then on the resilience side, to model, what potential outcomes we could have with fires and how we can be more resilient here in Colorado. I mean, I have the Rocky Mountains just a couple blocks behind me. Um,
Right.
and I'm always worried that they're going to catch fire, and they're brown. I mean, it's brown there right now, and that's normal. But
Right.
all it would take is a cigarette, you know,
Right.
from one of the
Yeah.
college kids, and that's it. And so how can you model for all of that and be better prepared, and
Yeah.
at the end of the day, create an optimistic, at least a chance at an optimistic future for future generations.
Yeah, so you come back to that, because I was actually I was going to call out, and with genuine appreciation, almost like have a moment of silence. I really appreciate you using the O word and talking about optimism, because that's something that a lot of us progressives forget to celebrate and have fun with the raising of awareness and painting alternative futures that are bright. And again, just inevitably linking it to politics. For better or worse, there is something to be said about make America great. We're going to bring everything's going to be better. All wars are going to be over. It's like people do want to hear that. However, sensible it sounds or whatever the history has shown us about those kinds of pronouncements, people do respond to confidence and positivity. And I do think, again, speaking only for myself and my observations as a card carrying member, I bemoan the fact that, my more liberal brethren and sistren do tend to come off as at times hysterical or doom scrolling, doom saying, when it's like we understand the urgency, but you don't want to turn people off with your enthusiasm or your passion, because then you're using all this energy, and if you're not able to make the conversion, what's the point?
Yeah, so I think I've had 126 episodes of my podcast or something along those lines, and I've closed every. The only thing that's consistent is I close every episode with what makes you optimistic about the future. And I won't lie, a lot of people need like some time to kind of mind shift and think of something.
Right,
Um,
right.
but more often than not, these people who are really engaged in different elements of the battle have things that they're very optimistic about. And it can be technology, it can be what I referenced earlier, that future generations. It
Yeah,
could be one of the great things about the climate community is that we're all on the same boat. And so that's made it easier for me to get podcast guests because they want to participate in what I'm doing, and I want to help them with what they're doing, and everyone is really collaborative.
yeah,
The negative thing is that everyone's also very siloed in their buckets, and there's such an opportunity for everyone to get together. And there's attempts like that here in Boulder. They have like cocktails for climate and things like that,
right.
where you can get together and cross fertilize ideas.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, I think the best solutions are these engineers who are working in a dark lab somewhere. I don't know if the lab's dark, or maybe it's really light, but it's a lab, and they're these super smart people who are building things that actually, if they go to market, could change the world. But a lot of them, going back to narrative and storytelling, they don't know how to tell the story of what they're building. And that's what I hear from a lot of thought leaders in this space, is that they need more storytellers to help people talk about the solutions that are available out there. Because people say this over and over again, and I'm trusting that it's true. We actually have all the technology we need to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Now, we're all hopeful that there's going to be more and better like sequestration and things like that,
Yeah.
but we have the technology, so it's just a matter of getting the right people together and deploying it.
For sure, and you just teed up. I thank you. You just teed up something that's a big talking point of mine, which is as an advocate for the humanities, full stop. While of course respecting STEM, and again, it's not a zero sum game, but in terms of advocating for humanities, and when I speak to students or talk to anybody, on behalf of what are kids going to do in this weird new world, my feeling is that first of all, there's always been a necessity to have people that can write well and people that can communicate effectively. But for those entering the workforce that are politically engaged or do have a passion for whether it's progressive or just the future period and want to be involved, what better way to contribute and get paid to do it than to use these skills for causes that are worthwhile. I feel like that's another thing that colleges, or and I'll call out my own house, English departments have not done a good enough job being really positive and optimistic about. Like, of course, there are jobs out there for you. The world, go talk to a CEO. The first thing out of every CEO I ever talk to is, we need more writers, we need more communicators, and it's like they're out there. They need to be encouraged that what they're studying matters. The skills they're learning are important, and shocker, could actually lead to a comfortable living, which would be, a great scenario.
And you've never had better access to the training for those skills to get those jobs. It's everywhere, and it's out there. And a lot of my work has been in workforce development and education. And I today had the honor of talking to a thought leader. He used to be the president of Southern New Hampshire University, which is like the biggest online school in the world.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the amount of disruption we're having, and it's mostly in the context of AI, because he thinks everything's going to be completely disrupted. And I agree with him, but this is what he's focused on. And with that disruption comes instability, there's political, there could be wars, all of that stuff. But what he said that I thought was really interesting, he said, if you were to talk to somebody in the US in like the worst throes of the Great Depression, like around in the 30s, mid 30s,
Yeah.
and tell them that in 20 years, people are going to be living in suburbs and have their own houses, and you're going to be able to get food from all over the world, and you're going to be able to drive a car and go to college. They wouldn't
Yeah.
have believed it. So there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
They're potentially light at the end of the tunnel. Like we've been through this
Yeah.
before. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you follow Ryan Holiday, Stoic writer. I was listening to him last night, and because he's pretty upset about the whole situation and everything we talked about today.
Yeah.
Um, and he's saying, what you need to do is go back to the really old works. And that's obviously plays into his thing with Stoics. But he's like, these things have been true forever. And
Yeah.
people have been through plagues, and people have been through, as much as we feel like we're going through something big, and we are,
Right.
people have been through, certainly for you and me, people have been through harder times.
Yeah.
Now the climate's a little bit different in that it's got a directionality that's one way right now,
Right.
and it doesn't end well if it keeps going that direction.
Yeah.
But at the same time, day-to-day life, must go on, and there is reason for optimism.
I love that, and I love putting a pin in that, and highlighting that whole notion, because I agree with it. I think there needs to be more of that. I'm also glad you brought up technology, because there's a lot of directions we could go in there. But one of the things I would say is, and I'd love to get your thoughts on AI and how technology has both threatened and facilitated the possibility of connection and learning and opportunity. But one of the things I take, I've kind of beaten this because I used to work in the tech industry, so I talked about this all the time. The technology has always been scary, whether we're talking about record players, car, horse and carriage. Like you go through history, and every advancement that is now old fashioned caused, extreme typewriters. Like there were things that there was this, mass concern and hysteria about. For me, when I think about the internet and just digital, the ease with which we can communicate globally, there's tremendous opportunity there. There's tremendous opportunity, right, via social media and fake news, propaganda. Yes, it cuts both ways, but always love to lean in on 50 years ago, 30 years ago, people like you and me might have had to start a newsletter on a piece of paper and hand it out at a library. Now there's at least the possibility of going viral and organizing and connecting communities. So that's where when I think about the younger generation, in general, that gives me a tremendous amount of opportunity, because they're so comfortable with the technology. And I love the idea of us discarding or being careful of the things that we need to be, but using every bit of technology to our advantage wherever it's possible. I find a lot of optimism there, and people in my circles, the artsy academic circles, it's like right now, everything technology, everything AI is awful. It's like, let's educate ourselves, let's be aware, let's calm each other down. But there's a lot of opportunity there. That's my conviction.
Yeah, I mean, it's at its basic, even just, we're on Zoom right now doing this. We've never met in person,
Hmm.
but we've had some really great conversations. And as a result of some workshops that I've been part of, I have some mastermind groups. I have three of them that I meet with regularly. And these people probably know a certain slice of who I am better than anyone else in the world.
Yeah.
Because we get together and we workshop each other's creative ideas and business ideas and things like that. And in fact, I've only met one of them ever in
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And I met her at her wedding. My wife and I were invited to her wedding in Vancouver, and I met her on the boat, about to go for the wedding in her wedding dress. And that's the first time I've actually met her in the flesh, but she knows me,
Yeah.
as well as anybody. And so that's
Yeah.
that's really encouraging. I don't know if this is the flip side or the funny side or whatever, but I mean, there's a story in the Times lately of this woman who built like a Chat GPT boyfriend, and like how much she loves him. And then someone introduced me today to, I think it's called Maya. I haven't played around with it yet, but it's a voice activated AI assistant that gets to know you, and it reads from your voice like your emotional state, and it'll change its voice to talk to you. Like if you're sad or scared, it'll kind of change its tone and the way it talks to you.
Yeah.
And so, and that maybe that's a good thing for some people. I don't know. And
Yeah.
there's going to be some blend of how how the Darth Vader, how much of us is human, how much of us is robot technology. But at the end of the day, I do think that the human touch is so important. And getting out with people is incredibly important. But then the technology enables us to have this conversation here. So
Right.
I guess more is better.
More is better. And I'm curious, like Ryan, from your own experience, have you found, I mean, again, just broadly speaking, have you found that as we have, more access in this kind of info overload landscape that we're all swimming in now, the work you do in particular and just the activism in general, has that gotten easier or harder, or is it a bit of both, inevitably?
Well, I never really I started my true activism just before the pandemic, so it's largely been digital,
Okay.
and through projects like the Carbon Almanac that I mentioned earlier. I think at the end of the day there are 400 authors now. There's like 4,000 people involved in it. I haven't met any of them in person, so that we did all of that with
Right.
prompts from Seth Godin, and then built teams, and it kind of organically came together. So I don't know the difference. I was a founder of, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of POW, Protect Our Winters. Jeremy
Mm.
Jones is a real famous snowboarder, started this, and it's meant to be like a purple climate organization built around skiing and snowboarding and then other sports as well, with the idea being that you can be as conservative as you want, but if you're rich and you're skiing Aspen, you've been skiing Aspen your whole life,
Yeah.
it's changed. You can't not recognize that, or else you're really wearing blinders.
Right.
And I was really excited because that organization is very much out there. And
Yeah.
then the pandemic hit, and then we were trying to run it, with the mountains closed and all through Zoom, and that was really hard. And it kind of fell apart because that a big part of that, the motivation to be part of that is being outside. So I think
Sure.
it's a mix of things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, right, again, inevitably thinking about cliches and stereotypes, but this notion of balance and moderation, in whatever path one chooses, generally is a safe bet because you want to be inclusive. You want to make sure as many people are invited to the tent as possible. And I just think there are ways that we can manage our messaging so that we're hitting the people that are very comfortable, at home in front of a screen, and the people that are like absolutely want that human touch, and wherever possible let there be overlap, but find people where they are, meet them where they are. I think that's one of the things we've seen social media. I think I was very wrong. I was overly optimistic, say 15 years ago, when social media started, because I saw this as a galvanizing force where communities for progressive or positive causes could find one another. What I really, I guess, wasn't sufficiently cynical was, yes, and it will also be easier for people to find the people that don't want to be happy and are looking for people to blame, and you can curate that content. I think that that's always going to be, right, the battle between good messaging and bad messaging. But again, for me, and where my optimism comes in, is it comes down to a very personal, you have to tell better stories. If you look at it like, well, I'm going to blame the people because they're not listening, I always come back to, it's almost like sales. If you can't close the deal, it's your fault.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And so there is that double-sided sword where, I wouldn't have had my podcast, which is kind of what opened up all these doors for me without some simple technology,
Yeah.
and the ability to distribute it globally, just and for $15 a month. I
Yeah.
think that's what I pay total for all the software I use,
Yeah.
for my podcast. But on the flip side to it, like you said, it also, these technologies isolate maybe us more from the
Yeah.
rest of the people, because we all know what we agree on, and we're going to hang with like-minded people, and then it just segments the population in a lot of different ways, that we're seeing, less of a melting pot and more of people in their own pots.
What a high five, like that. You just nailed what I was, trying to say, which is, yeah, the ideal of social media is it's this opportunity, and it's true, it happens for diverse groups to all come together. But what it's also done is enable people to say, I don't ever want to hear anything progressive, so I can actually shut out. I won't even have to listen to that. I don't have to go through the newspaper and filter out what I like. I can curate my own content. So yeah, I think it comes down to just finding ways to, always have an open invitation for communication, but homing in on the people that are receptive and finding them where they are. One thing I was going to ask earlier, but it's actually better to ask this at the end. As I said, I really did kind of not get into your full bio because it's impossible. But when I talk to students and I'm trying to fire up the younger people, one of the things I'll tell them is like, well, don't do what I did because I got a master's but didn't get the PhD, went into the corporate world, I wrote novels, and then I wrote poetry. It's like, don't follow that path, but someone like you, I look at and I see this wonderful blend of personal passions and professional kind of experience. Like you're obviously an outdoorsy guy. You obviously are doing things that are meaningful to you, not just because you're politically aware and feel that urgency, but you've kind of built a life where your strengths and your interests have overlapped. Could you talk a little bit about how you've carved out your path and what advice you'd give like a bright-eyed, 20 something that's like, I'm picking up what these guys are putting down, but I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. And how do I get to be a podcaster? Like starting slowly and saying, how do we encourage a young mind to say, you really can do whatever you want, but here are some hints.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. One, I knew for most of my college career and when I started working that I wanted to be in publishing, and I thought I'd be in publishing forever, and that books were good. Books go back to Gutenberg and or even before Gutenberg, and they're it's gonna be a lasting industry. And I had a really great run, but then the industry like fell apart in a big way. And I'm lucky because I'm back in publishing, and I'm actually back publishing books, which is kind of amazing for me. But the lesson for that is that change is going to happen. So you have to be ready for that.
Yeah,
Who would have thought publishing would not be the industry it was when I started in the 90s. The other thing I think is to find the others. And so you just need to find other people who share
yeah,
that passion, whatever it is. And if it is like a podcast, like I'm helping mentor one of my buddy's daughters in creating a podcast right now. And so, it's not hard. Like I figured it out. It took me a little while to figure it out, but now I
yeah,
can teach somebody really quickly. And there's even better ways to do it now. There's better applications. I'm kind of doing it my way.
mhm,
Um, and so it's like kind of, people talk about the largest viable audience. In some ways, I think it's better to think about the smallest viable audience. Having 3 or 4 people like these, I mentioned these masterminds that I'm part of, that you really talk to and who get to know your motivations and will call you out when you're not delivering on what they know you want to be doing,
mhm,
is really important. So you really want to find other people. And like I said, I mean, in a lot of cases that's going to be in person, but in
yeah.
my masterminds, I've only met one of them in person, and I've spent hundreds of hours with these people, and some of the deepest conversations that I've had. So yeah, find the others.
So and so thank you for that. And in terms of like, so say a student that is genuinely willing and able and is like, I'm definitely getting some good education in the classroom, but how can I jumpstart? You had mentioned earlier, like it's never, I don't want to misquote you, but you said something really cool about something along the lines of it's never been easier to kind of get that education, get that exposure. Could you talk a little bit more about an example or two, or just high level? Like, what would you encourage a student that's like, I'm in. Where do I go? What do I do? What are some pathways to get involved or find, those like-minded folks?
This sounds old school, but books are a really good resource. If you can pick someone that you admire, their outcome in life, read their story, because you'll
Yeah.
probably find that it wasn't always easy for them,
Yeah.
that they had to go through a lot. Also, the other thing, and this is one of my, I call it a superpower, but I've been trained by some really good people, like in business development and networking, is don't be afraid to reach out to somebody. Like you can write to famous people and they might write back, and build a relationship with them. And if you're young and you can position that well and say, hey, I really admire you, can I ask you some questions? I wouldn't ask them for any time right away, but ask them
Yeah.
a question or two that they'll respond to,
Yeah.
that shows that you actually know who they are and that you actually have a genuine interest in them. That's basically what I do most of my day,
Yeah.
is I'm out prospecting for people and meeting people, and you'll be amazed who responds. And then you get better at asking too, for people's attention. And
Yeah.
then, the podcast for me takes that to the next level, because I get people who would not meet with me for coffee to come on my podcast
Yeah.
because it helps them tell their story. You
That's
know,
right.
And so if you can create a vehicle like that that you can
Yeah.
use, and there's a lot of, I mean, when I was mentioned earlier that I was interviewing these youth leaders, a lot of them have podcasts, and it's cool, and they get good guests, and they're 15 years old.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing what you can do if you just kind of just do it, and then accept that not everything's going to work out. You know, you mentioned that I'm an entrepreneur. I am, but none
Yeah.
of my businesses have ever made made me real money. So,
Yeah.
you know, someday it will. I'll find the one. But
Yep.
you know, not everything's going to work out, but it's all learning.
It is, and you know, I tell when I've talked to students, I'll tell them like I heard the same advice when I was your age, and it terrified me. But I want it to liberate you. It's very unlikely that whatever you think you want to do now, or whatever your first job is, it's extremely unlikely that in 5, much less 10 years, you'll still be doing that or have that same job. And that's a good thing because you'll probably be learning, other opportunities will come along, or you'll discard some of the baggage and realize life is short. I want to spend my time doing something that's meaningful to me. Don't wait till you're 50 and say, I hate my job and it's too late for me to learn other skills. So I think that that tenuousness, and I frankly think that's one of the reasons that the STEM, it's actually similar to what we've been talking about all afternoon, which is, well, the STEM is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's hard work. The people that do it, full like props to our math and science you know, experts, but there's a path that at least seems like, yes, you go into this program and you will get a good paying job and be employable. It's much scarier to be in the humanities and go, I don't know exactly what I'm training for, but I encourage people to find that liberating and say, you might not know, but boy, that might lead you in some directions and you're pulling up different skill sets and different networking opportunities. And suddenly you're finding, or like you talked about with these podcasters, you're creating your dream job. How cool is that?
Yeah, yeah. And you know, it goes back to the optimism and really believing in yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm not always perfect at that. But what I've learned, and especially I had a really bad ski accident last year, had me big surgery, had some stuff, had put my dog down within 2 weeks of that, got laid off, a bunch of stuff, all within like right about this time last year. And you know, it's easy to get down. But
Yeah.
what I've discovered is that if you're optimistic and you have gratitude for what you do have, it's
Mhm.
not necessarily that the world changes, but you see different things because you can only see certain things in the world anyways, and you see more of the opportunities and less of the obstacles. It's like
Yeah.
it's a mental game, and it's, you know, when you're down, it's easy to see more down things, and
Yeah.
more obstacles. So just believe in yourself and push forward, and sometimes fake it till you make it. That's a big thing that I've done throughout my career in life, and you'll be surprised what you can pull off.
I love it. I love it. So I never ever want to, and I try to never put my guests on the spot. Of course, I'm recommending to everyone that they check out your website and your podcast, but do you have a couple of evergreen books or documentaries or just individuals when you need that spark or people that have changed your life? Doesn't have to be the one, but are there a few things you could throw out for us to, you know, check out and get fired up or informed, or anyone that, you know, is one of your go-to sources?
So I listen to a lot of podcasts now, and I think Rich Roll's pretty amazing. And his current, you know, I think it's his current interview. Maybe he has one since, is with Sophie Tucker, which is a EDM band. And I highly recommend anyone listen to it. It'll bring a smile to your face. It's fascinating. Um, so I think, you know, I always have headphones on. It drives my kids and my wife nuts because they never know if I'm listening to something or not. But I usually am. And then, you know, I always Tom Robbins, like all of his fiction, I think is like, it just changes your view on the world. And so I have a number of his books and I reread them over and over again. They're very tattered. And then the other thing that I would recommend that I did work on, I mentioned earlier, is the Carbon Almanac. And the idea of the Carbon Almanac is that it's a nonpartisan book of facts. So that if you're having a conversation with someone about, do windmills kill whales? It's all fact-based, you know, one or two page spreads
Right.
on that issue, and very well indexed and easy to navigate. It's a good book to have around because you'll be surprised, even in your own misconceptions about how things work.
Awesome. Ryan, super inspiring, super informative. Obviously, when we do our write up, as always, we're going to put all the links in, but just for people that are want instant gratification, people trying to check you out, how can they find you online?
RyanFlahive.com. I haven't updated it in a while. I'm not very good at that. Climate Changers with Ryan Flahive is easy to find on any podcast platform. And I'm super active on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn's a genius platform, and I'm really easy to reach that way. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Well, listen, what you're doing inspires me on a lot of levels. I feel this is the best gift. I think this is what you do well. I come out of this re-energized. Today of all days, I think we need it. What we're going to see tonight. I feel inspired, and I do feel like that solidarity of we're stronger when we're together. You're a force for good. So I want to thank you for that. I wish you all the best as you continue to push toward the light. And let's check back, sometime later this year and just kind of we'll get a sense of where we each are in terms of our immediate objectives and what our sense of like how things are shaking out politically and in the tech sphere. But in the meantime, we'll be checking out your podcast and just continuing to draw light. But really appreciate your time and your generosity.
Well, back at you. I appreciate the work that you do. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I look forward to our future collaborations.
Right on. All right, folks, thanks for checking out Some Things Considered. This is a podcast where we celebrate story and we want to talk about creativity. If you want to do that, help spread the word, send people my way. If you want to be on this podcast, let me know. Check out SeanMurphy.net. Everyone stay safe, be cool, and support your creatives. They are the lifeblood of our culture. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at SeanMurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.